The quiet moment before everything changed. The rain outside the small studio window tapped gently against the glass, like a soft heartbeat counting down to something unknown. Sandra Bullock sat alone in the corner of the room, her hair still damp from the drizzle. The world saw her as strong, confident, untouchable. But tonight, under the dim golden lamp, she felt the weight of memories she had kept locked for years. Her phone buzzed once, lighting up with a familiar name, Keanu Reeves. Her hand trembled slightly before she picked it up. The sound of his voice was calm, steady, and kind, just like it had always been. But there was something different tonight. Maybe it was the pause in his words or the way the silence between them carried meaning heavier than any conversation. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice low and gentle. She wanted to say yes. She wanted to keep the walls up, to protect herself from the storm inside, but she couldn't. Her heart had been whispering for too long, and she was tired of pretending she didn't hear it. She took a deep breath, her voice soft. "I don't know anymore, Keanu." The line stayed quiet for a heartbeat, and then another. The story between them wasn't a fairy tale people imagined. It was filled with missed chances, unspoken feelings, and years of friendship that sometimes felt too precious to risk. They had supported each other through heartbreaks, losses, and triumphs, always careful not to cross a line they couldn't return from. Keanu finally spoke. "Do you want to talk? I can come by." Her heart raced. She had been strong for everyone else, but tonight she didn't want to be strong. She wanted to be seen. Minutes later, a knock at her door echoed through the quiet apartment. She opened it to find Keanu standing there, rain still clinging to his jacket, his dark hair damp against his forehead. He looked at her with eyes that had always held patience, kindness, and a quiet strength that made the world feel safer. He stepped inside, shaking off the rain, and for a moment, they just stood there. Two friends who had known each other for decades, standing on the edge of something bigger than either of them had ever admitted. "You don't have to say anything," he said softly, sensing her hesitation. "I'm here." Sandra sat on the couch and Keanu joined her. The room was silent except for the distant sound of rain and the ticking of the old clock on her wall. She looked at him, really looked at him, and felt the years between them, the shared laughs, the quiet support. The stolen glances when no one was looking. Her heart whispered again, louder this time. Memories flooded her mind. The time on set when he stayed late to help her rehearse lines even though he was exhausted. The quiet dinner they shared after her father passed. The way he had defended her when rumors swirled. He had been her anchor, her safe place, and she had never told him how much that meant. Her voice broke the silence. "Keanu, have you ever kept something inside for so long that it starts to hurt?" His brow furrowed slightly, his gaze never leaving hers. "All the time," he said. She swallowed hard, her hands trembling in her lap. "I think I've been afraid. Afraid that if I said it, everything would change, and maybe I'd lose what matters most." Keanu didn't speak right away. He leaned forward slightly, his elbows on his knees, and waited. His silence was gentle, inviting, giving her space to continue. The world outside seemed to fade. The rain, the city lights, the noise. All of it disappeared until there was only the two of them and the words she had carried for years. "It's you," she whispered. "It's always been you." His breath caught for just a second, and his eyes softened, but he didn't interrupt. Sandra felt tears prick her eyes. "I didn't mean for it to happen. I didn't plan it. But somewhere between the laughter and the long talks and the quiet moments, my heart chose you. And I didn't know how to tell you without risking everything." A flash of lightning lit up the room for a moment, and in that light, she saw something shift in his expression. Not shock, not discomfort. Something deeper. Something that had been there all along. He reached out slowly, his hand brushing against hers. "Sandra," he said quietly, "do you know how many times I almost told you the same thing?" Her breath caught. Keanu's voice stayed soft, but there was a tremor of emotion she had never heard before. "I didn't want to ruin what we had. I thought maybe it was better to keep it safe, even if it meant keeping part of my heart quiet. But hearing you say that..." He paused, his eyes glistening. It feels like the world just stopped moving for a second. The clock ticked. The rain slowed. The air felt electric. They didn't rush toward each other or turn the moment into a movie scene. Instead, they sat there, two souls finally speaking the truth after years of silence. It wasn't perfect or polished. It was raw, honest, and full of the kind of love that doesn't need grand gestures to be real. Outside, the clouds began to break, and the faint glow of moonlight slipped through the window. Sandra smiled through her tears. "So, what now?" Keanu gave a small, almost shy smile. "Maybe now. We stop pretending." The rain stopped completely, leaving the world wrapped in a quiet stillness that felt like a promise. Somewhere in the distance, a car horn echoed, reminding them that life would keep moving. But for this moment, the world had listened and waited for their hearts to speak. The world outside the window felt new. The morning light slipped through thin curtains, soft and golden, like the world was quietly celebrating a secret only two people knew. Sandra woke before her alarm, the sound of the city outside blending with her racing heartbeat. For a moment she forgot where she was. Then she remembered the words from last night. Her chest tightened, not with fear, but with a strange and fragile hope she hadn't felt in years. She sat on the edge of her bed, fingers brushing over her phone screen. There was no new message yet. She wondered if Keanu was awake, if he was replaying the same memories, if he had doubts now that the night's magic had faded into morning reality. Doubt tried to creep in, whispering warnings about friendships ruined and worlds watching. But her heart, still trembling from last night, spoke louder. Down the street, Keanu stood by his kitchen counter, holding a mug of coffee that had gone cold. He wasn't thinking about scripts or studio calls. He was thinking about Sandra's voice, about the way it cracked when she said, "It's you." He had heard her on screen 1,000 times, but nothing compared to that whisper in the rain-lit room. His phone buzzed with a message from a producer. He ignored it. His fingers hovered over Sandra's contact, but he hesitated. Should he call? Should he give her space? He wasn't a man who rushed feelings. He had spent a lifetime choosing kindness over impulse, humility over pride. But something inside him said that waiting too long might let fear rewrite what had just happened. Sandra finally texted, "Are you okay?" Within seconds, his reply came, "Better than okay. Can we meet today?" They chose a small cafe tucked behind an old bookstore, one of the few places in the city where famous faces could blend in. Sandra arrived first, her heart pounding as she pushed open the wooden door. The smell of fresh bread and coffee wrapped around her, warm and grounding. She spotted him in a corner booth wearing a plain black hoodie and a shy smile. He stood when he saw her, his hand brushing hers briefly as she sat. That simple touch sent a wave of warmth through her. For a moment, they didn't speak. The world outside carried on. Cars honking, people laughing, the distant sound of construction. But inside that cafe, time seemed to slow. Keanu broke the silence. "Last night, it felt like something shifted," she nodded. "It did, but I'm scared." His eyes softened. "Me too." The waitress brought 2 coffees, and Sandra wrapped her hands around the warm cup like it was an anchor. "We've been friends for so long," she said quietly. "People know us. They have their stories about us. What if this changes everything? What if it ruins the best thing I've ever had?" Keanu's voice was steady. "Or what if it makes it even better?" His words lingered between them, delicate but powerful. As they talked, a group of tourists entered the cafe. One of them, a young woman, froze when she recognized them. Her eyes widened and she whispered something to her friend. Sandra felt a jolt of anxiety. She could already imagine the headlines, the speculation, the noise. Keanu noticed her discomfort. Without a word, he reached across the table and gently touched her wrist under the edge of the table, a small gesture that said, "It's okay, I'm here." The tourists glanced again, but then seemed to respect the moment, turning their attention elsewhere. Sandra exhaled slowly, realizing how much she had trusted him in that instant. They spent hours there, sharing stories they had never told anyone else. Sandra spoke about the nights she felt lonely even in crowded rooms, about the times fame felt like a cage instead of a gift. Keanu admitted how often he had chosen solitude over risking his heart. How kindness sometimes meant staying silent even when he wanted to speak. Outside, the weather shifted again, clouds gathered, and a light drizzle began to fall, echoing last night's rain. As they left the cafe, Keanu opened his umbrella and held it over both of them. The world outside saw only two friends walking closely under a small umbrella, but inside that quiet circle, their hearts were rewriting everything they thought they knew. On the way to her car, Sandra's phone buzzed. A tabloid reporter asking if the rumors were true about her and Keanu. She froze, the weight of the world's eyes pressing down. Keanu saw the message on her screen. He didn't flinch. "We can't control what they say," he murmured. "But we can control what's real." She looked up at him, raindrops catching in her eyelashes. "And what's real?" He smiled, a gentle, unguarded smile that melted her fear. "This." For the first time in years, she didn't care about the cameras, the noise, or the expectations. She cared about the truth standing beside her. They reached her car, and for a moment, neither moved. The drizzle became a steady rain, and the sound on the roof of her car felt like applause from the universe. "I don't know what happens next," Sandra admitted, her voice trembling. "Neither do I," Keanu said softly. "But maybe that's the best part." As she drove away, she glanced in the rearview mirror and saw him standing there in the rain, watching until she turned the corner. The city lights blurred through her tears, but her heart felt lighter than it had in years. What neither of them knew was that a stranger in the cafe had snapped a quiet photo, not invasive, just a candid glimpse of two people sharing something real. That photo would soon ripple across the world, sparking whispers, hope, and endless speculation. But for now, for this fragile morning, it was still just their secret. Whispers on every street. The city was alive with whispers before dawn broke. An image had begun to circulate online, a blurred but unmistakable photo of Sandra and Keanu sitting close in a quiet corner of the cafe. The lighting in the picture was soft, their faces partly turned away, but the world didn't need clarity to fill in the blanks. Hashtags bloomed like wildfire. Some people smiled, hopeful for a story about genuine love in a world hungry for good news. Others speculated, weaving stories of scandal or past heartbreak. Sandra sat at her kitchen table, phone buzzing nonstop. She scrolled through messages from friends and colleagues, some teasing, some sincerely curious. One message stood out from her assistant. "They're calling you the love story we all needed." Sandra set her phone down, her hands shaking slightly. Her world had always been public, but this felt different. This was her heart on display, fragile and exposed. Across town, Keanu was at his small workshop, a space filled with old motorcycles and half-finished sketches. He had always found comfort in fixing things, in quiet tasks that required patience and care. But today, no engine or tool could distract him. His phone lit up with calls he ignored and messages he left unread. He wasn't afraid of rumors. He had faced headlines before, but he worried for Sandra. He knew how unforgiving the spotlight could be. He finally sent her a simple text. "Are you holding up?" Her reply came quickly. "Trying. Can we talk?" An hour later, they met at an old art gallery owned by a mutual friend who agreed to keep the doors locked. The gallery smelled faintly of varnish and rain-soaked stone. Dim light pooled on the wooden floors, highlighting abstract paintings that seemed to echo the confusion and beauty of their moment. Sandra stood near a canvas of stormy blues and grays, her arms folded tight. "It's everywhere already," she said, her voice soft but heavy. "I didn't even know someone took a photo." Keanu walked toward her slowly, his boots quiet on the floor. "It was bound to happen sooner or later," he said gently. "We can't live our lives hiding from whispers." She turned to face him, her eyes glistening. "But you know how it works. One photo becomes a headline becomes a story, and then the story becomes whatever people want it to be." He nodded, understanding. "Then let's tell our own story," her breath caught. "Are you sure?" He hesitated, the weight of decades of friendship and shared history pressing on his chest. "I've never been more sure of anything," he said finally. As they spoke, a sudden loud clap of thunder rolled over the city. The sound startled them both, and for a moment they laughed nervously, the tension breaking like a brittle branch. The storm outside mirrored the one swirling in their lives, loud, unpredictable, but somehow cleansing. They wandered through the gallery, pausing at paintings and sculptures, speaking in low voices. Keanu told her about the nights he had driven aimlessly through the city just to clear his head, about the times he had almost called her but hung up, afraid to change everything. Sandra admitted that she had reread old text threads between them on nights when the world felt too heavy, finding comfort in his quiet words as they spoke. They didn't notice the old gallery owner, a kind woman named Elena, listening quietly from behind a curtain. She wasn't interested in gossip. She had known them both for years, but hearing the tenderness in their voices reminded her of something pure the world often forgets. Later, she would tell them, "What you have is bigger than the noise outside." After hours of talking, they stepped outside. The storm had passed, leaving the city streets slick and shining like polished silver. A group of fans stood across the street, phones in hand, whispering but not daring to approach. Sandra and Keanu exchanged a glance, their eyes saying everything words couldn't. Keanu held out his hand, not dramatically, not for the cameras, but as a simple offering. She took it. Their fingers intertwined naturally as if they had been holding hands in another lifetime. The fans gasped quietly, but instead of rushing toward them, they watched in awe, sensing the sincerity of the moment. Walking together down the wet sidewalk, Sandra felt a strange mix of fear and freedom. She knew the world would talk. She knew more headlines would come. But for the first time, she didn't feel the need to hide her feelings. That night, social media exploded with the new photo. Keanu and Sandra hand in hand under the post-storm city lights. The caption from a witness simply read, "No red carpet, no script, just real." In a small apartment across the world, a young woman recovering from heartbreak saw the photo and smiled through her tears, believing again that love could be quiet and kind. In another city, an elderly couple shared the image over tea, remembering their own early days. The world, often starved for tenderness, leaned closer. Meanwhile, back in Sandra's apartment, she scrolled through the reactions, not the noise, not the gossip, but the quiet comments from strangers saying they felt hope tonight. She whispered to herself, almost like a prayer. Maybe this is bigger than us. Her phone buzzed again. It was Keanu. "Are you okay?" She smiled, her heart steady. "Yes," she texted back. "Because of you." She didn't see the tabloid headline already scheduled for the morning. Sandra and Keanu? Love that silenced the world's cynicism. Nor did she see the angry email her publicist had sent, worried about the press storm. She didn't know that a major talk show had already planned to ask her about him. All she knew, in that quiet moment before sleep, was that her heart had spoken. And for once, she wasn't afraid of the world listening. When the world turned its eyes, the morning sunlight spilled across Sandra's apartment, bright and sharp against the edges of her curtains. Her phone vibrated on the bedside table again and again, a relentless reminder that the quiet moment she shared with Keanu was no longer just theirs. She reached for the phone hesitantly. Every entertainment site, every trending page, every headline carried their names: Sandra Bullock and Keanu Reeves, spark whispers of love. Decades of friendship or something more? The love story we all needed right now. She scrolled past the loud headlines to the small comments beneath them. A widowed woman writing that the photo gave her faith to try love again. A young man saying it reminded him to tell his best friend how much he cared. A teenage girl confessing she had texted her estranged father after seeing them. It wasn't just gossip, it was connection. Across town, Keanu's morning was just as noisy. Reporters camped outside his building, cameras clicking even when he stepped outside to feed a stray cat he'd been looking after for months. The cat rubbed against his leg, purring as if nothing in the world had changed. Keanu smiled quietly, wishing the world could hold things as simply as the cat did. By noon, Sandra's agent called. "You have interviews lined up all week. Everyone wants to talk about you and Keanu. Some are offering big specials." "I'm not ready for that," Sandra replied, her voice firm but gentle. "This isn't a show, it's us." Her agent hesitated, then softened. I understand. Just be prepared. They'll push. She ended the call and sat in silence, staring out the window at the skyline. The city outside bustled with life, unaware of the quiet battle inside her heart. She had built a career on grace under pressure, but this was different. This was her private world being rewritten by strangers. Later that afternoon, Keanu knocked on her door. He wasn't wearing sunglasses or a hat to hide. He came as himself, calm and steady. When she opened the door, he smiled faintly. "Are you okay?" he asked. She let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "I don't know yet." They sat at her kitchen table, a pot of tea between them. The steam rose gently, curling into the air like unspoken words. "People are watching us," Sandra said quietly, "and I hate that it scares me." Keanu reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. "We've lived under the world's gaze for so long, but this isn't for them. This is ours." She looked at him, searching his face for doubt. There was none, only the same quiet strength that had always anchored her. A sudden buzz from her phone broke the moment. It was a message from her publicist. "A major network wants an exclusive. They're offering a live audience reaction. Do you want to control the story or let the rumors grow?" Sandra stared at the message, her heart pounding. "What if we go silent?" she asked. "Then they'll write their own story," Keanu replied. "And it might not be the truth." They both knew the world loved to twist whispers into storms. Keanu leaned back, thinking, what if we didn't give them a headline? What if we gave them something else, something honest? Sandra frowned slightly. "Like what?" "Like showing them what kindness looks like," he said. "Instead of making this about gossip, we could use the attention for good. Maybe a small charity event, something real." The idea settled between them, fragile but hopeful. The next evening, they attended a children's art fundraiser they had quietly supported for years. They didn't alert the press. They didn't make speeches. They simply showed up, laughed with the kids, and bought paintings no one else had noticed. But one parent recognized them, snapped a photo of Keanu kneeling to listen to a shy little boy explain his painting, Sandra standing beside him with tears in her eyes. That photo hit the internet overnight. The caption read, "This isn't a publicity stunt. This is love and kindness." The response stunned them. Thousands of people shared stories of quiet love. Parents reuniting with children, friends forgiving old wounds, strangers helping each other. The noise of gossip began to soften, replaced by something gentler. But fame's spotlight is never entirely kind. The next day, a well-known talk show host made a cruel joke about their age and called their story a publicity move. The clip went viral, stirring negativity. Sandra watched the video, her hands clenched, old insecurities rising. She texted Keanu. "Maybe this was a mistake." He replied instantly, "Don't let one loud voice drown out 1,000 quiet ones." She took a deep breath, his words sinking in. She remembered the little boy at the fundraiser, his small voice trembling as he said, "I painted this because I believe people can be kind." The next night, Sandra invited Keanu to a rooftop garden she loved. The city lights stretched out endlessly, a glittering map of stories and lives. She wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and watched as he approached quietly, carrying 2 mugs of cocoa. They stood in silence, the hum of the city below like distant applause. Sandra finally spoke. "Do you ever wonder why life waits so long to bring people back to where they're supposed to be?" Keanu smiled softly. "Maybe because we needed to grow into the kind of people who could hold it without breaking it." She turned to him, the wind catching her hair. "I'm scared of losing you." He stepped closer, his voice steady. "Then let's not lose each other, no matter what happens." Their hands found each other again, a simple promise beneath a sky full of stars. Far below, in a diner on the edge of the city, a waitress scrolling through her phone saw the new rooftop photo someone had secretly taken. She showed it to a couple arguing at a nearby table. The couple fell silent, then reached across the table to hold hands again. The world was still watching, but something was changing. It wasn't just about 2 famous names anymore. It was about the reminder that even in a loud, divided world, quiet love could still make people listen. The test of quiet hearts, the city woke to another wave of headlines. The rooftop photo of Sandra and Keanu had traveled farther than either of them imagined. Newspapers in London, Tokyo, and Sydney ran the picture alongside words like hope, kindness, and a love the world didn't know it needed. For a moment, the world seemed softer. Strangers smiled at each other on buses. An elderly man in Paris left flowers on a neighbor's doorstep. A young woman in India wrote a letter to her estranged brother, but not everyone celebrated. One major tabloid released a harsh article questioning their sincerity, suggesting the fundraiser appearance was staged. Sandra's publicist forwarded it to her phone with a single note. "Ignore it if you can." "They're fishing." She placed the phone face down on her coffee table, her chest tight. She wanted to ignore it, but the words still cut. A quiet knock broke her thoughts. When she opened the door, Keanu stood there, holding a small paper bag of fresh croissants from her favorite bakery. "Breakfast delivery," he said softly, his smile easy, but his eyes searching hers. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "You saw it too?" he nodded. "And I don't care." They ate on her balcony, the early sunlight warm against their shoulders. Below them, the city moved as if unaware of their quiet breakfast. "Do you ever feel like we're standing on a stage we didn't ask for?" she asked. Keanu took a sip of his coffee. "All the time. But maybe we can choose what story gets told?" She studied him for a moment. He had always been steady, unshaken by fame's chaos. But now she saw something else. A quiet resilience, like someone who had survived storms and chosen to build again. That afternoon, they attended a small film charity event. They had promised months ago to donate signed memorabilia to support young filmmakers. As they entered the hall, dozens of flashes went off. Reporters called their names, asking if they would confirm the rumors. Keanu simply placed a gentle hand on Sandra's back and guided her inside without answering. Inside, a nervous film student approached them, clutching a script. "I'm sorry," the student stammered. Seeing you two gives me hope, like maybe dreams don't always have to be crushed by the noise." Sandra's eyes softened. She took the script, promising to read it. Keanu leaned forward slightly and said, "Don't let noise decide your story. Write it anyway." Later, a reporter cornered Sandra near the refreshment table. "Are you and Keanu ready to make a statement?" She smiled politely but didn't answer. Instead, she found Keanu across the room, laughing quietly with a group of young filmmakers. After the event, they slipped out the back door to avoid the crowd. The alley behind the venue was quiet except for the distant hum of traffic. Rain clouds gathered again above them, the sky heavy but beautiful. "Sometimes I feel like we're walking a tightrope," Sandra whispered as they walked toward his car. "Maybe," Keanu said, opening the passenger door for her. "But I think we're learning to balance." That evening, they drove to a quiet coastal road just outside the city. The ocean stretched endlessly beside them, waves crashing against the cliffs. Keanu parked near a small overlook and they sat on the hood of his car watching the horizon. "Do you remember the first movie premiere we attended together?" Sandra asked, her voice soft with nostalgia. He chuckled. "How could I forget? You wore that green dress that made half the room forget their own names." She laughed quietly, her cheeks warm. "And you spilled water on your shirt 5 minutes before the cameras." "It was strategic," he teased. "A distraction." The laughter faded into a comfortable silence as they watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and rose. After a long pause, Sandra spoke again. "Keanu, what if all of this attention fades and the world moves on?" He turned his head, studying her profile in the fading light. "Then we'll still be here. The world doesn't need to watch for this to be real." She leaned her head on his shoulder, the wind tangling her hair. "I'm glad it's you." "Me too," he said softly. As darkness settled over the ocean, a single shooting star streaked across the sky. Sandra closed her eyes and made a quiet wish, not for fame, not for fortune, but for the courage to hold on to what mattered. The next morning, their phones buzzed again. Someone had leaked news that an entertainment network was planning to air a segment questioning their character, citing unnamed sources. The noise grew louder. But alongside the noise came something unexpected, Hundreds of handwritten letters from fans began arriving at their team's offices. Stories of kindness, resilience, and second chances filled envelopes and inboxes. One letter stood out, a note from a nurse who had lost her husband the year before. She wrote, "Seeing the way you look at each other reminded me that even after loss, love can find us again. Thank you for reminding me to keep my heart open." Sandra read the letter aloud to Keanu over the phone, her voice trembling. Silence followed on the line, but it wasn't empty. It was full of shared emotion. "This isn't about headlines anymore," Keanu said finally. "It's about people remembering what love feels like." That evening, they decided to step out publicly, not with a statement, but with an action. They planned to visit a local children's hospital. No press release, no cameras. They arrived quietly, bringing books, toys, and time. Keanu sat on the floor building blocks with a boy in a wheelchair, while Sandra braided a little girl's hair and listened to her stories. Nurses watched quietly, some with tears in their eyes. A parent whispered to another, "They didn't come here for attention. They came to give." Word spread anyway. Someone's phone captured a short clip of Keanu helping a child build a tower while Sandra clapped and cheered. The video went viral, not because it was flashy, but because it was real. Later that night, sitting in Sandra's living room, they watched the video on her phone. Sandra leaned into Keanu, her head resting on his chest. "They're still talking," she said. "Let them," he whispered. "We'll keep living." The world outside continued to buzz, but inside that quiet room, they found peace in the sound of each other's heartbeat. When the noise became a song, the sky over Los Angeles was still gray when Sandra woke up, her heart beating with a mix of fear and calm she couldn't quite explain. The world had been loud for days. Headlines, interviews, clips of strangers debating their lives. But something in her felt different now. Lighter, as if the noise was beginning to turn into music. Her phone buzzed with a morning alert. "Global Morning Show invites you and Keanu to speak live. Millions expected to watch." She stared at it for a long time, then put the phone down. Later, at a quiet corner of Griffith Park, Keanu waited by a wooden bench, the wind ruffling his dark hair. He looked out over the city, its sprawl stretching under the gray sky. When Sandra approached, her steps soft on the gravel path, he turned and smiled faintly. "They want us to go on TV," she said. "I know," he replied, his voice calm. "Do you think we should?" He took a deep breath. "I think maybe we should tell them the truth, not for the cameras, for the people who see themselves in this." She sat beside him on the bench, the city's hum far below. "I'm scared," she admitted. "So am I," he said softly. "But maybe courage isn't about not being scared. Maybe it's about showing up anyway." They sat there for a while, letting the silence hold them. The next day, they stepped onto the stage of the morning show, not with flashy clothes or scripted answers, but as themselves. The host smiled warmly, sensing the gravity of the moment. "There's been so much speculation," the host began. "What would you like to tell the world today?" Sandra glanced at Keanu, her fingers brushing his under the table. She spoke first, her voice steady but soft. "We didn't plan for the world to watch. We didn't set out to be a story. We're just two people who found something real after years of friendship. And we're grateful," Keanu nodded. "We know how stories can get twisted. But what matters to us isn't the noise. It's kindness, respect, and the reminder that love doesn't have to be loud to be powerful." The studio fell silent for a moment, a rare pause on live television. Even the host seemed moved. After the show, a clip of their words spread worldwide. But instead of gossip, people shared stories of their own. Marriages rekindled, friendships repaired, parents calling their children after years of distance. The noise had turned into a song, a chorus of small acts of love. A week later, Sandra and Keanu quietly visited a small community center in a struggling neighborhood. They painted walls, served food, and played games with kids. No cameras followed them. A single volunteer snapped a photo, later posting it with the caption, "They stayed long after everyone else left." They listened. They laughed. They cared. That night, Sandra's living room was dimly lit by a single lamp. She and Keanu sat on the floor, surrounded by takeout containers and laughter. "Can you believe all this?" she asked, shaking her head. "All because of one photo in a cafe." Keanu chuckled quietly. Maybe it wasn't the photo. Maybe the world was just waiting for a reminder. She leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. "A reminder of what?" "That love can be gentle," he said. They fell into a comfortable silence, the kind only shared by people who had walked through storms together. Outside, the city buzzed with life, but inside that small apartment, there was peace. Months later, the headlines faded. Other stories took their place, but for countless people, the memory of Sandra and Keanu's quiet courage stayed. On a spring afternoon, they walked hand in hand through a farmer's market, unnoticed by most. An elderly woman selling flowers recognized them. She pressed a small bouquet of daisies into Sandra's hand and said quietly, "Thank you. My husband and I held hands again because of you." Sandra's eyes filled with tears as she hugged the woman. Keanu's hand tightened gently around hers. They didn't need applause or cameras or validation. They had each other, and they had shown the world that love, real love, doesn't need a stage. As they left the market, a light breeze swept through the stalls, carrying the scent of fresh flowers and bread. The world kept moving, but somewhere, in 1,000 small ways, it had been changed. Sandra looked up at Keanu, her smile soft and sure. "So what now?" He grinned faintly, eyes warm. "Now we live." And under the wide-open sky, they walked on, two quiet hearts who spoke, and the world listened.